A stepmom wrote to me recently saying something that might feel very familiar. She said, I've spoken to my partner about how I feel so many times. He listens, things improve for a bit, and then we end up right back in the same place. She said she chooses her words carefully. She tries not to come across as critical. She explains how things land for her. And for a while, it seems to go in. And then something happens. A message, a moment with the kids, a change in plans. And suddenly, they're back where they started. If you've ever had that experience where you've talked about it properly and yet nothing really sticks, this episode is for you. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Stepmum Space Listener Questions with me, Katie South, where each week I take one of your questions and talk it through here, not just to reassure you, but to help you understand what might actually be happening underneath. As always, the names are anonymised, but the feelings and situations are very real. Now, this week's question comes from Sarah. She says, I've spoken to my partner about how I feel so many times. He listens, things improve for a bit, and then we end up back in exactly the same place. Why does nothing actually change? Now, I can feel you all nodding your heads at this one because it's something that I hear a lot. So if you recognise yourself in that pattern, you are definitely not alone. I hear it all the time, and it's especially frustrating because it usually comes from women who have already done the work and made sure you and your partner are both clear on what happens next at the end of the conversation. And yet, here you are again, feeling invisible, like your needs don't matter, and thinking, how are we having this conversation again? What's important to understand is this. It isn't usually a communication problem. It's a pattern problem. Because you can have really good, honest conversation and still be inside a dynamic that pulls you both back into the same roles. So what tends to happen is this. You raise something, your partner hears you, and often he really, really does. There's a bit more awareness, a bit more effort, and you get your hopes up that things might actually change. But then something shifts in the system. A child is upset, an X message comes in, or plans change. And under that pressure, people revert. It's not because they don't care, it's because they're responding to multiple pulls at once. So you end up back in something that feels really familiar. You adjusting, slowly feeling annoyed or anxious, him just trying to keep things steady, and the original issue quietly returns. And here's the bit that feels so defeating, because it makes it look like the conversation didn't work, when actually the conversation may have been really helpful. But despite that, the pattern stayed the same. So if you keep ending up in the same place, it's not necessarily because you haven't explained it properly. It's because the pattern itself hasn't actually shifted. And this is where it can get confusing, right? Because on paper, you think, well, we've talked about this, we've agreed it, we're on the same page. But in real life, it can feel like having the same conversation on repeat, just with slightly different wording each time, only to be undermined or forgotten by your partner the minute the pressure rises, which, if we're honest, is not the kind of progress anyone's looking for. Underneath this, it's usually something about position, where you actually stand, what influence you really have, and what happens when things are put under a bit of pressure. Because that's the moment it shows up. And if that isn't clear or consistent, you end up compensating. You start thinking more, you start adjusting more, you start carrying more, trying again to say it in a way that will land. And over time, it gets really draining. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you're trying to fix what's happening on the surface without anything underneath it actually changing. And that's why this issue doesn't resolve itself with more conversations, because it's not just about how you're communicating. It's about how you're operating inside the structure you're in. And if the structure stays the same, you can say it differently 1,000 times and you will still end up in the same place. The good news is this can change, but it changes when the pattern shifts. When roles are clearer, responses are more consistent, and you're not constantly pulled back into the same positions. Now, this pattern where you talk about it, things improve, and then you get pulled back there again is something I work on a lot with stepmoms and couples, because it's one of the main things that ends up taking so much headspace and can make women feel like their needs aren't even listened to. But the way to get out of it isn't just changing what you say. It's in understanding how the pattern is actually playing out in your relationship and changing it so it holds even when things get a bit pressured. So to Sarah and to anyone listening who recognise themselves in this, nothing is wrong with you. You're not failing to communicate. Your partner isn't just ignoring you. You are both in a pattern that keeps repeating. And patterns can change, but they don't tend to change on their own. So if you're listening and thinking, this is exactly what keeps happening to us, this is usually the point where things either start to change or stay exactly as they are. If you want more structured support with this, you can find the details for private coaching or Back in Control, my Stepmum program, in the show notes. We start Back in Control on April 17th, and there are just a few spaces left. Or you can message me and we can talk it through. And if you know another stepmom who might recognise herself in this episode, send it to her. Because one of the hardest parts of stepmothering is thinking you're the only one going through it. You're not. I'll be back next time with another listener question. Till then, take care. And before we finish, if you're listening to Stepmum Space and recognising yourself in the constant adjustment, the walking on eggshells, the anticipatory anxiety before contact, or the way one message can derail your whole week, that doesn't make you weak. It's a position many stepmums find themselves pulled into inside complex stepfamily systems, and it's more common than people realise. Back in Control is my structured program for stepmoms who are ready to move out of chronic vigilance and into steadiness inside their own home. It's psychologically grounded, contained, and designed specifically for stepfamilies where dynamics feel destabilising. If you're ready for more than just insight, search Stepmum Space Back in Control and you'll find the details. Back in Control, structured support for stepmoms who are done walking on eggshells and are ready to feel steady again.